After 10 years of being on ice, the Fantastic Four franchise is coming back this year, this time under the banner of Marvel Studios. Hi, my name is Zach, and today we're going to rank all 4 Fantastic Four movies while we're still able to say that. Like many of you, I started this YouTube channel because I cannot watch a movie without needing to talk about it afterwards. And if that sounds like you, you're in the right place. Consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, while I'm talking, join me down in the comment section. Give me your ranking of all 4 of the Fantastic Four movies, from the 1994 Roger Corman Legend all the way to Stick. And with all that said and done, let's just kick off my list with number 4. And in last place for me is going to be that Roger Corman produced legend, The Fantastic Four, where infamously this is a movie that was never intended to actually come out and be released to the public. Unbeknownst to the director, the cast, and the crew, the studio who had the rights to the Fantastic Four only made this movie so that they could hold on to those rights and eventually make another real Fantastic Four movie down the line. And so they gave a very puny budget to this film, never intended to release it. And when you watch this movie, it's very clear as to why that is, because this movie looks incredibly cheap. It is not a very engaging story. In fact, at only 90 minutes, the big failure of this movie is that it actually tries to do too much, establishing Doctor Doom as well as the Fantastic Four's origins. They've also got this weird subplot going on with this villain that lives underground called the Jeweler, who's trying to impress a blind chick with a diamond. I repeat, she's blind. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of things that just do not make sense in this movie. Also, it is a little bit unfair to be super harsh on this movie because it was never intended to be released, so in some ways it doesn't even feel finished. A lot of the audio mixing is terrible. Most of Doctor Doom's lines, you can't even understand what the guy is saying half of the time, and because the budget was so puny and tiny, the effects in this and the action sequences are incredibly lame, that make this movie feel like a made-for-TV movie or even an episode of a Fantastic Four television series from not just the 90s, but maybe back in the 70s. The cast here is not particularly great. Everybody feels miscast. There are so many cheesy sequences. There are so many cheesy lines and hokey acting that this was honestly so bad it's good at times, but for the majority of it, it was just bad.
Look at you. The Fantastic Four.
At number 3, we've got Stick, or Fantastic Four 2015, if you want to be generous. And this is obviously the Josh Trank train wreck. And I kind of feel bad for Josh Trank when it comes to this movie because, again, infamously, the director, before the day that this movie came out, tweeted that this was not his vision. The studio took it and meddled with it, and we would have seen a good movie, but now we're not going to, which definitely hurt the box office and hurt Josh Trank's career. And truth be told, the first bit of this movie, the first act of this movie, I actually don't think is that bad. It does set up these characters, I think, quite nicely. There was some camaraderie and some dynamics between these characters and the actors that I actually do find quite enjoyable within these characters. I also don't mind that they kind of ditched the whole going into outer space, how they get their powers, and changed it to interdimensional travel, which was more of a concept brought up in the newer Fantastic Four comics. But even with all that said, when it does come to what makes this movie a train wreck is the obvious second half of the film, where there are terrible, obvious reshoots and wigs being worn by some of the actors. This has a very huge lack of action, and there's really no character development throughout this movie with our characters. Also, Doctor Doom here is really only Doctor Doom by name. He pops up in the third act of this film for seemingly no reason. His motive is completely stupid, trying to save his world by bringing in Earth's world. It just feels like having the obligatory action sequence at the end of a comic book movie that this movie needed to have. And while Josh Trank wanted to do a more body horror type element in this movie with the Fantastic Four getting their powers, which I do think when that sequence appears in the movie, it's fascinating and interesting. They don't do anything with it. All of it is on the cutting room floor, to the fact that this movie doesn't really have a second act. We go from the first act And then immediately we're almost thrust into the third act of this film. It's jarring. It feels completely incomprehensible. There are good ideas here. There's actually some decent actors in this, with Michael B. Jordan and Miles Teller being the most of note. And I will admit, while this wasn't as bad as I remembered it being back in 2015, it's really no mystery why this movie is what put this franchise on ice for 10 years. Our runner-up, Tim Story's first Fantastic Four, which is a movie that came out in 2005, so it's still in that growing pains era of the comic book genre. Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins hadn't come out yet. We're pre-MCU, and you can really feel that when you watch Fantastic Four, because this movie struggles with being a superhero movie. When it comes to what works in Fantastic Four, I do think that it is so cheesy and so breezy of a film that it's hard to be offended or even mad at anything in this movie. The cast are all doing a decent job. Chris Evans obviously is bringing the most comedic timing and the most levity to the film. We've got Michael Chiklis in here as the Thing, who is the heart and soul of this movie, and I do think the journey of the Thing, going from Ben Grimm, the human, to now being this rock monster, and the toll that takes on him, and honestly the devastating concept that is, I do think works decently well in this movie. But this movie doesn't know how to execute its narrative. This movie is basically a series of gags in the middle of the film where they're just laughing at the Fantastic Four. It doesn't really feel like they're laughing with the Fantastic Four. This movie feels like it's poking fun at the concept of what the Fantastic Four is throughout the entire runtime, that literally nothing in this is really taken seriously. And Dr. Doom in this as the villain is kind of off doing his own narrative until eventually they have to bring him in to the third act of the film to have the obligatory battle sequence. It honestly is kind of funny how reminiscent this is to Fant Four Stick, just with a lighter and more fun tone that's aimed at a younger audience than Fant Four Stick was. There's nothing in here that's particularly interesting. There's nothing in here that is particularly engaging, but it is completely watchable. So almost by default, it comes in at number 2. Which brings us to number 1, and that's going to be Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. And honestly, the only thing that this really has over the first Tim Story Fantastic Four is that the narrative is actually a narrative story where they establish a threat early on of Galactus and the Silver Surfer coming in to prepare the Earth for Galactus to devour. It's very clear what the Fantastic Four are trying to stop. It's very clear what the goal and objective is for the Fantastic Four, which is something I never felt in the first film. The cast here also feel a lot more comfortable in the role and as their character dynamic as a team. I think the standouts here are still Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis as a Thing and Johnny Storm, who have a great banter throughout the majority of this movie. There's actually some jokes and some comedic setups in this movie that, unlike the first Tim Story, actually did get me to laugh out loud and felt more like it was trying to be a real Fantastic Four movie than the first film was trying to be. But of course, the shortcomings of this is still that it's only an hour and a half. They try to jam-pack Galactus, the Silver Surfer, Sue and Reed's marital problems in this 90-minute runtime, also while still trying to do their goofy antics and jokes for a majority of the movie. Makes it feel very unbalanced. It also makes it feel kind of rushed and unfulfilling by the end of it. But much like the first film, it's hard to really get that offended or mad at this movie. It's just such an easy watch that even though it flies by, you don't really feel like you gained much from it. It's completely watchable. So by default, it comes in at number 1 because it's the only movie of these that at no point did I feel like I wanted to shut off. It was pretty easy to watch. God help Marvel for going forward. Hopefully Fantastic Four: First Steps can take the new number 1 spot, because I don't really like any of these movies. But that's just my opinion on the Fantastic Four franchise up until this point. What did you guys think of the Fantastic Four movies? How would you rank them? Is it different than mine? Does it look the same? Comment down below. Let me know. I'd love to see them. If you guys like content like this, I've got a Marvel ranking playlist I've been working out. You can check out some more up there. I've got the Spider-Man trilogies in there. I've got Daredevil, all 3 seasons, because Born Again is coming out soon, so you can check out my ranking for the Daredevil seasons up there, or you can just check out my latest uploaded video to the channel right down there. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't just watch movies, talk movies, and I'll see you guys next time. Flame on.